Welcome to Construction Genius. And as you know, from time to time, I like to have folks on the podcast talking about the various technologies that are impacting construction. And a technology that is impacting construction and many, many other people is AI, or artificial intelligence. But what is AI? How is it impacting construction specifically? What are its limits? What are the misconceptions associated with AI? And how should you be going about figuring out how to use AI in your business? These are all questions that I ask my guest today, Daniel Hewson. Daniel is the Data Capability Manager at Elecosoft, and he oversees the development of overall data and AI strategy and focuses on discovering how AI can be leveraged to improve project planning and to identify inherent project risk. The thing I like about Daniel is that he is a realist. We talk very much about the limitations of AI, one of them being the fact that your AI is only going to be as good as the quality of information that you feed it. Another limitation, which is very interesting and something that we have to really embrace when it comes to using AI models, whether they be Chat GPT or other types of models, is that the output you're going to get from an AI is not 100% accurate all the time. And you have to just accept that. 100% accuracy is something you're not going to get with these models because they're not designed to do that. And so we talk about that in some great detail. We also talk about some key questions that you need to ask AI vendors, whatever they're vending to you when they're knocking on your door, telling you, hey, look, here's the AI easy button that's going to change your construction company. And we also discuss the importance of construction companies forming partnerships with technology companies in order to be able to, over time, exploit some of these technologies to help build projects more effectively and more productively. So it's a very practical, very straightforward conversation that gives us a good overview of AI as it pertains to construction. So feel free to share this with other people in your organization and other people that you know. And please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Daniel, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tremendous. I've had a number of guests on over the last year or so, and we've been diving into some of the new technology that's coming out, particularly around AI. And I want to continue to dive into that and tap your expertise for my audience. So what do you mean by AI?
Yep. Okay. So I'll start by giving sort of like the technical definition. So artificial intelligence is actually a very broad area. Like formally, it's defined as any system that acts with an intelligent way, right? So this could mean basically anything, right? Like technically, using the formal definition, you can get an Excel spreadsheet as acting in an intelligent way, therefore it's AI, right? Which isn't what people mean. When I'm talking about AI, usually what I mean is machine learning. And that's where it's basically a piece of software or a process which has learned how to do what it is that it's doing from real world data examples. So it's something that hasn't been programmed with explicit rules. There's been data that's been gathered. So say you want to try to identify maybe failure on a construction site. You have examples of pylons that have been failing. You go and you take photos of them and you classify them into things that are not failing and things that are. And then an algorithm looks at these photos and learns what it needs to look for to detect that failure. So someone hasn't actually told it explicitly the rules. And that's quite liberating because it means we can move from problems where we understand how it is that you need to code something up or tell a computer how to do it, to going, I'm going to show you lots of examples about how to do this, and you're going to figure out, hopefully, how to actually solve this problem for me.
Okay, so in that process there, I think it's a neat way of describing the difference there. What are the limitations or the challenges that your typical AI comes across in this machine learning environment when it comes to being useful?
So there's a few challenges there. First is it's not just the AI, but the actual process around it, right? Because when you're moving towards an AI driven approach, you're moving into the world of where things are not guaranteed. You're going to have what we call, true positives. So where you think that the AI should tell you something and it does, but when you're also going to have false negatives, false positives, things like that. So that's to say that it's going to tell you an answer, but it's going to be wrong, right? So this means that you have to move it into it in a way where you go, okay, I'm going to use this technology. It's going to enable me to automate some process, some bit of work that I'm doing, but actually it's not going to be 100% right, which isn't necessarily the end of the world, but it's about going, okay, what processes do I need to put around this such that it can tell me a thing and maybe it'll be wrong, like, 5% of the time, 10% of the time it'll have quirks. Like, if anyone's used ChatGPT, you'll see that it's giving you a really good answer and then it goes off the rails and tells you something that you're like, whoa, no, that doesn't make sense, right? So it's a case of going, okay, this technology, it automates something for me, but it has got issues in that it will give me erroneous results. So I need to shift to a process where I go, this is going to automate something, but it's slightly unreliable. So I need to have a way of validating and checking that and only using it where it makes sense that maybe some things will slip through the cracks, or I have a really ironclad way of making sure that they don't.
Okay, so now I think for the first time, I've not for the first time, but I can clearly articulate this now. I have in mind like an Excel spreadsheet where I'm calculating numbers and I do the little drag down thing and I hit the button and I know my number is correct. And I think what you just articulated there is a way is if we're going to use AI effectively, we have to have a fundamental mindset shift because we're so used to interacting with software and everything being bulletproof that comes out of it. But with AI, it's a different mindset that I have to take.
100%. And when it comes to identifying and doing, your root cause analysis to, okay, this went wrong. Why did it go wrong? In your example, you'd look at the spreadsheet and you go, there's a case, I needed an if statement. There was this one case where maybe I was calculating freight on something. This was actually international, not local. So we didn't capture that. So you can come away with a very clearly articulated reason of there was this error in the code or the system I was using. Here's what we need to do about it, right? With AI, you still have things that you can do about it, but tracking it back isn't as easy because they're what's known, not always, but often as black boxes, where you can imagine something goes wrong, you look back, and what you might find in an AI example is, hey, it never saw examples of this, therefore it never had a chance to learn how to do it. So what you can do is you can try to then give it those examples, but it'll be a case of saying, okay, sometimes it's going to pick that up and sometimes it's not. So you're not going to get as much of a ironclad, this is why, and we fixed it for sure. It's going to be, okay, we're going to take these steps to attempt to remediate it, but it may not work 100% of the time.
It's so interesting because whenever you don't get something out of a, so to speak, traditional software program, you immediately assume operator error. And with AI, that is not the case, which is so this is interesting because if you can have that mindset shift and then allow the limitations of AI, embrace those or accept those, then you can be more effective in actually using AI for what it's good for, right?
Absolutely. It's just shifting from, some people say this is going to learn to do all these amazing things. And sometimes that's true, but usually it's going, okay, we're just going to move to a case where it's like, it's allowing us to now solve problems where I don't know exactly how to tell it to solve the problem, but I need to be able to validate that it did solve the problem, right?
Okay, excellent. So then what is the role of the expertise of the user? Like, so I suck at math, right? But if I know I put the right input into Excel, then I'm going to get the right answer. So I'm not an expert, but I can get expert answers and I can know that they're correct. What is the role of an expertise in effectively using AI?
Yep, there's two key roles. One is around developing it, right? So there's sort of like two mindsets when it comes to developing these new fandangled AI applications. One is we'll give it lots and lots of data and it will just discover how to do these things. And that's one approach that it is quite successful, admittedly, in a lot of areas, like language models are born out of this. The other is saying, you know what? We've got these people that are experts in this subject matter and there's certain things they look for, right? So we're going to build in to the model the idea of looking at these important data features. So you imagine that you gather some information and, an example that I had was I was talking to a company yesterday where they were looking at identifying failure of equipment. And one of the things they had an organization where they had inland operations and they had marine operations. Now, unsurprisingly, the marine ones corroded a lot more, so they failed more, right? So one of the things they went away was they had location data, which would be like saying this is located in this position. Maybe they had GPS tags, but it didn't have that categorical bit of information of going inland versus marine. So what they, as experts, did was they went, well, obviously you need to know whether it's in a marine environment. So they went and transformed that data from GPS location data to actually like where is this located, and then that can actually feed a model. So that's one in terms of the development. The second is in terms of utilizing the AI, right? And what it allows you to do is it allows you to broaden the base of whoever's trying to do this application. So it sort of like supercharges your experts and that it makes them more productive. Because again, they've shifted from I have to go and do this process to I have to let some tool do a process, whatever it might be. It might be gathering leads, it might be getting quotes, it might be doing takeoffs from a drawing and going, I'm not going to have to do that manual process anymore. I'm going to look at the results of it and now I'm going to validate it, right? And they're really critical for a couple of reasons. One, they're able to actually check, is this correct? Is this incorrect? When it comes to liaising with whoever your company's AI provider is for that tool, saying, hey, this is wrong. And as an expert, you're going to probably have some ideas for why it's not getting something, right? If we're talking about takeoffs, it could be that, maybe the way some things are laid out are always a bit different because maybe the subcontractor in that domain does something a bit different, right? So they're able to sort of like liaise and help explain a bit the process of how they do it, and that can often help the development.
So it's interesting because the expertise then is in play when you are interpreting the information the AI gets you. How about the expertise in play in terms of prompting the AI initially so that you get some meaningful results from it?
Yeah, so that's a good example of that is around language models, right? So ChatGPT, things like that. And that's where you sort of need two bits of experience there. One, you need domain experience. So going, okay, what does good language look like around the question I'm asking? 'Cause one of the things that they'll do is they will pattern match to where they've probably seen examples of this text before. So if you ask it in a very open-ended way, like maybe as a child would ask, it's going to give you a childish answer back. If you ask it in a very formal, technical way, what will happen is it will pattern match back to where it was reading some technical literature. So you'll often find, and they've done research on this, that if you're asking something like ChatGPT questions, you want to very much match the tone of the sort of answer that you want. So if you write it in a way like a formal paper would be asking a question, you're going to get a very formalized answer back that's going to try to match back to that. So that's where the second sort of expertise is just understanding a little bit about how these systems work. Because once you understand that, okay, ChatGPT is a language model, what it's doing is it's just trying to pattern match bits of text that it's seen before. Therefore, if I want a really formal, detailed answer because we're trying to drill out some technical information, I'm going to ask it in that way and it's going to give it back to me. On the other side, if I'm trying to use it for marketing or trying to spice up a report, again, not understanding how it works, you can shift your language into how you prompt it so you can actually get maybe a more marketing oriented response.
Excellent. So you know how these things go, right? The hype comes and AI is going to change everything and all this kind of stuff. But what exactly, in terms of construction, are the areas where AI is going to have or is already having a noticeable impact?
So I think there's probably three or four areas where it's going to have a big impact, right? So some of the examples are around your site progress, site monitoring. There's a lot of companies looking at ideas of, okay, we can put cameras on site, different field devices, we can have drones walk through and they can take camera footage. And that can be used for a couple of ways. It can be used to try to work out where we're going in terms of site progress. It can be used to identify potential safety hazards. So that's one area where we've got a large set of data where we're gathering all this information, all this video footage, camera from site, and it's able to sort of look at that and process it to get lots of insights for people. So that's a really sort of interesting application. It's still very much in the early days there. Like this isn't a simple problem and it's not going to be solved quickly, but that's starting to generate some momentum. Another one, which is sort of what I've been looking at, is around the planning space. The idea of you go away, you develop a plan for how you're going to execute a project, And the idea of using tools that will go and look at your project plan and say, hey, we think that actually you're overestimating or underestimating how long it might take to do certain activities, right? Because as humans, we tend to be very optimistic about how long things should take. And there's ideas around using artificial intelligence to go and look at previous projects, very similar to the ones that you're working on, and then actually pulling out how long did this take historically, right? And then using that to sort of inform, okay, maybe you have a good reason for saying that this scope of work is only going to take a month, but historically it took you 3 months, right? And then sort of flagging that to let you know that this is probably going to delay your project. So we're seeing it very much around the planning space as well.
Let me just ask you about that, because immediately I thought of some limitations. For instance, obviously every construction project is unique in one way, in that it's done in a different geography, and that geography then has a lot of determining factors associated with that in terms of supply, the quality of your subs, and things like that. So what value, or how do you interpret the value of the data of previous projects that may be similar to the one that you're thinking about, in terms of using that data to help you with the planning? Hope you're enjoying my conversation with Daniel. As you'll know from listening, AI is not going to replace everyone. And particularly, it's not going to replace the leaders in your organization. And that's why you should go out and buy my book, Construction Genius. It's all about effective, hands on, practical, simple, no BS leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're listening to this podcast, that means this book is for you. So this is what you do. You go out to Amazon, you spend $20, you buy the book, you read one chapter a month. That's it. You take two takeaways from that one chapter, and over 30 days, you apply that takeaway in your leadership. And over time, your leadership will be radically transformed just by spending $20 buying my book. So go out to Amazon, buy the book right now. I know you'll find it tremendously helpful. There is a link in the show notes to get the book.
Yeah. So the answer there is that some things are different and some things are the same. So for instance, if you're doing, let's say you're doing a railroad, or actually a better one would be tunneling, right? So if you're doing tunneling, obviously the rocks, the geology of where you're actually working is going to be radically different and going to enforce, constraints in your program. But if you look at a schedule and you see they didn't do a geotechnical study, you already know that there is going to be a high risk of delay because they haven't done a geotech study, right? And that's usually how a story starts of, well, there was a tunneling project and it got delayed by 12 months because they didn't do that geotech study, right? So it's in things like that where, yes, the outcome of that geotech study will be different, but you can already highlight that a large percentage of time you're at risk of delay because you haven't done it. Now, it could be that there might not be a delay because you're in really good soil, it's not a concern. But by looking at that, we can say, okay, this is something that's going to increase the risk. In other things, you're right. It very much depends in terms of the industry or what it is exactly that you're doing, where it's located. If you're working, I'm from Australia, so if we're working like in Central Australia, your supply chain is radically different because everything's on the coast, right? So to get it in there, you're talking that if you miss certain things, it's going to be huge delays. Whereas if you're working a project that's, coastal in Australia, where you're near all sort of like your concrete fabrication, like everything's built near and shipped to you, obviously you're going to have a very different picture. So that's something where you are able to learn lessons where things are similar, but you also need to feed in not just the schedule, but you need that meta information, right? You need to be telling a tool like that, or they need to be picking up. This is sort of where the project is happening. And it doesn't have to be precise geography, it just has to be able to relate it to similar projects of that kind.
Okay. Okay. So you talked about site progress, site monitoring, and planning space. What's another application that people are looking at in construction?
So the other ones are around the ideas of sort of like safety monitoring. So an example that I gave was in the site monitoring, but you can also see it around different tools that are sort of being used to do quality checks around, I don't know what the term is in America, but in Australia we have like safe work method statements, things of that, like checking that you're actually identifying all the potential hazards. So, AI is very good at identifying patterns and finding things that should be there. And this is like a perfect application, right? Where it's something that, usually you have to do and identify certain hazards and they're very common and maybe someone misses it, right? And that's the thing where it can pick that up. It is also being used around similar parts of construction, like around your accounting things. So, like doing auditing, checking that there's no funniness going on in terms of like subcontractors, identifying like fraudulent payments, things like that. And then the last sort of way I would say is just in, there's probably two other ways, which is around, the tools that are being built up now are being powered very much by AI, right? So there's lots of tools that are leveraging things like ChatGPT to go, hey, if you're going to review this contract, you can review it, but why not use a language model to go and pull out bits of information, right? So you can imagine that you drop that contract in or that document, whatever it is, and you can ask a question. So it's sort of like tooling that's not construction specific, but it's definitely helping construction where, we're really under pump. We don't have the time to go and often review things as in depth as we need. Being able to have these tools that actually can speed up that process and actually enable people to ask a question, pull out, does this talk about, when am I meant to be getting to site? When am I meant to be doing this? What spec do they want for this? To be able to pull that out quickly. Those tools are helping a lot. And then the last one is probably just for larger companies, which is the idea around data analytics. The idea that a lot of companies are getting a bit more switched on in terms of like, hey, this AI thing seems to be getting a bit of steam. We're going to record some information and then having your analyst try to pull things out, right? Which could be really simple things like just doing basic statistical analysis and going, hey, every time we don't do this on a project, we end up doing bad, right? Could be the example of a technical study. But doing that sort of analysis to look back over past data, whatever it is, in ordering and planning and actually being able to model out and get some ideas for what are the things that caused us to do poorly or caused us to do well.
Excellent. So, what are some of the limits of AI that aren't going to be overcome anytime soon?
This is sort of a hard one to pick because they've been making jumps and bounds, but I'll go out on a limb on a few things. So, like, the most obvious one is this idea of, moving from a process that's going to be right every time to one that you're going to have to check the outcome, right? That's fundamentally built into the DNA of AI or machine learning. Now, what you'll see is that it'll get a lot more accurate, so it's not going to be as much of an issue, but it is still very much going to be there. Another one I'm quite dubious around language models, so things like ChatGPT. There's a lot of people that'll say it's learnt this and it's understood, and that's really not true, right? They're incredible models that are really amazing, but all that they're doing is they are just pattern matching and trying to predict what the next likely word is. Now, to do that, they've built really impressive models of the world, but they don't actually understand things, right? So that's an area where I think we're going to get better at using them, but they're never going to, well, not never, but I don't think language models in their current form are going to truly understand things. They're still going to be quite limited. So from that point of view, that's quite good in that it means, they're not going to magically learn to understand things and you'll have them automating everything. People are still going to be in the loop, but it's just acknowledging what they can do and then understanding that people are going to have to be in that loop to validate what they're doing.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that leads me to my next question is the one of misconceptions, and obviously you get the whole spectrum, right? AI is going to change everything for the better. AI is going to change everything for the worse. Everything in between. So, what are some of those common misconceptions that people have in terms of AI?
There's a few of them that I like to go through. One of them is when companies decide to embark down the path of actually developing it in-house for some application. So, it could be the example of maybe, you're a company that goes and does an installation of like power poles on site, something like that, right? And you know that for some reason, some of them are not done correctly, and that leads to a failure. You want to go, okay, we're going to take photos, we're going to try to identify and automate a process. What people don't realize is when you go through the journey of doing AI, about 5 to 10% is actually the part of building this model and having it do the mathsy modeling part. 80%, well, maybe not 80, but about 70%, 60% is just in gathering and cleaning the data, right? So when companies go down this path, there's the idea of I'm going to take this bit of information, I'm going to put it into a model, and it will learn things. Right? And that's simply not true. What happens is when you actually start looking at the data, because data is generated by humans, and we're very clever at solving problems, but we're very terrible at following process and procedure. And what you find is that the data often isn't standard. There's bad examples in it. There's cases that are just flat out wrong. And this will apply for whatever application, because I've done a few of these myself. Whatever application you're looking at, you'll find that a lot of the examples that you have are just wrong. Maybe you're monitoring some process and the sensor failed, right? So now that data is completely garbage. So most of the time is actually spent cleaning it, like cleaning it, trying to understand what the data is actually telling me, and then at the end, you're modeling it.
So that means then, I mean, what I'm hearing there is that if you're going to use a tool, you should be looking for a tool that has had a tremendous amount of upfront work put into it
Yes,
to make it useful. Is that right?
yes, absolutely. So the good tools out there will sort of like be very transparent about that, you're going to have to go away and do some data cleaning. Like maybe they have it where they have a lot of these processes automated, but there's significant work in actually going and making sure that it can understand real world data sets, because real world data is very messy, right? And
So let
that's
me
sort of
ask you
the
this.
other. Yep.
Let me ask, this is important. When it comes to technology, construction contractors have vendors knocking on their door every single day saying, here's my easy button, and if you hit it, your life will change, right?
Yep.
And so AI, and now we have these AI vendors coming in, obviously, with various solutions, and I'm sure there's again, a spectrum of how effective they are. What are some key questions a contractor, let's say the president of $100 million contractor, what are some of the key questions they should be asking these people to kind of begin to get an understanding of perhaps the quality of the system they're being presented with?
Yeah. So that comes down to like there's several layers of that, right? So what you want to do is you want to start off by going, okay, you know, you're saying this is a magic AI thing. What part of this is AI and why does it need that? Right. And that often takes a lot of people by surprise. It's like it's got the AI, the marketing people assured us you wanted this, and I think once you say, well, okay, like we know a bit about AI, so you know, why does it need it? And two, how confident is it? Like, what's the failure rate, right? Like, just actually starting to ask, like, how often is it correct? How often is it incorrect? And quite quickly, you're not going to be able to know just from that answer, but the way in which they actually go about answering that question is going to tell you a lot. If they go, no, 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 ours works all the time, it's like, really? Like, it works all the time. Okay. Like, I don't know any tool that works all the time, so I'm already a little bit intrigued. So, the other thing that I look at is I also try to go, okay, so how often does it fail? What data prep do we need to do? How do we need to make sure that it's going to be able to understand our data? Are there some areas where it's not performing well? So it's all around feeling out like, what have your previous clients been doing? And how similar is it to what I'm doing, right? Does it not handle this area really well? And again, how they answer that question is going to tell you a lot. And the final thing that I try to look at is, particularly if it's some AI tool, is, what research have you done? Like, how is this? It's a very technical field. Have you guys published papers? Do you have any white papers? Like, what literature do you actually have around your tool showing that it's actually had a real world benefit? Because you'll find that a few of the vendors we've looked at, in terms of partnering, they'll have white papers, they'll have research showing that, hey, we use this over this many projects and we reduced it by so much percent. And it doesn't have to be an amazing, really technical paper, but as soon as you see that, you go, okay, like they're fairly legitimate, right? Like they've actually gone away and they're trying to measure. They have some way of actually assessing, yep, people use this tool and it actually did improve it. We're not just putting an AI, it's gonna, press here and solve your problem. It's like, here's how it did it. And you'll find that, all of the time it may not work, but 50% of the time it improves the outcome. That's a great thing, right? And by understanding that, then you can go, okay, this tool is going to improve things, but we understand how realistically it's going to improve things.
That's excellent. So you have to obviously take a skeptical approach to it and ask those tough questions. I'm curious if you could wave a magic wand, let's say 5 years from now, and again, we're not going to hold you to this in any way. Where do you think the industry will be, construction, in terms of the use of AI? Realistically speaking, is it going to be something where there's been an exponential adoption of it, or are we still going to be in sort of the early stages?
I think we'll be coming out of the early stages, right? So at the moment, I think we're very much in the part where there's lots of startups trying to get ideas working, and they're sort of at the very early stage in need of a bit of polish. So I think 5 years is a good time span for a lot of these companies to work out their various teething issues. And I think in 5 years' time, it's going to be a much more significant factor. It's not going to be everywhere. It's not going to have solved every problem, but I think things like site progress are going to be in a much better state. I think a lot of the processes are going to have finished being digitized. right? So I know, having worked in construction at the start of my career as an engineer, not just a data scientist, it was very common that you'd get like emailed, scanned PDFs of like an actual site plan, right? Which is great, but when you're trying to do takeoffs and things like that, it's not so hot. So I think things like that are still probably going to be a part for smaller contractors, but for most people, they're going to be moving more into that digital workflow. And once we have that, you're going to see that actually these tools can really start to bear fruit. I think the AI landscape in general is going to have improved quite a lot. So the hype over the last 2 years has probably been around language models. And the direction they're going is they're sort of going the direction of what's called agents, is what they're trying to work on. And the idea is you have a language model and you can ask it questions, but if you ask it to do things like mathematics, sometimes it'll get it wrong. A lot of the times it'll get it right because it's not built to do that, right? It's built to try to predict words, not do actual calculation. The idea around an agent is going, okay, these tools can't do these complicated technical tasks, but they can give us really good plans. Like if you ask it, give me a plan to do this, it can do that. And the idea is, what if we ask them, give me a plan to do it, and then we give it tools to execute each of those bullet points? So I think what you're going to see there is you're going to see tools like ChatGPT, other language models really have developed this agent concept out, and you're going to find that a lot of bits of software are going to be able to integrate with it. So the example we give is we imagine that for our products around project management, you might be able to go to an agent, a chatbot basically, and you'll ask like questions about your project and it will be able to actually answer them. So you won't have to go through, harass your planning guy and say, hey, when does this bit of work start? Or why can't I actually go and get access to site yet? Like what's driving this? And you'll be able to ask it and it's going to use those tools to go away and actually say, hey, this is what's happening on this date and it's being held up by this task. So I think not all of the tools, but certainly in 5 years' time, a lot of them are going to be integrating with this. So the way in which we're using our tools will change quite a lot. We'll be doing it in a more conversational way.
Yeah, it's interesting. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do, and Elecosoft and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'll just give you a brief sort of rundown. So I started off, I did a maths degree, did engineering, started working as a mechanical engineer, and I worked on projects doing backup power and renewables. And I decided after a few years of doing that I wanted to be a bit more technical. So I decided to go back and upskill on data science. I did a little bit of work with the Australian Navy, trying to do predictive maintenance. Tried to do a PhD, but worked out that PhDs aren't for me. Came back and I started looking at this problem of project planning, where I met the guy that I currently work with, Mark Chapman, who's head of innovation for Elecosoft. So I started somewhere else, but we worked together. I left, and he eventually headhunted me. And what we're doing is we're trying to understand how can we help our clients and improve the process around, at the moment, planning, but not just planning, tendering, and also asset management, and how can we sort of distill that expertise like we were talking about earlier, right? So the idea is, can we go and look at a bunch of previous schedules and talk to planning experts and go, right, we often know that there's lots of things that drive project success or failure. I gave the example of a geotech thing earlier. So it's a case of going, how can we try to put some intelligence in our products that's actually going to let people make smarter decisions, try to identify those risks. So we're really focused around trying to improve that planning process and put more knowledge in the hands of our users so that they can make better decisions. Eventually, the end goal is that we'll use artificial intelligence not just highlight risk, but suggest ways people can get out of problems. So the idea being that if we identify that your project's at risk, maybe we'll suggest, hey, you're doing some tunneling work, you should probably do a geotechnical survey, right? The idea is that we'll eventually be suggesting things like that. So my work at the moment is very much around understanding what's the roadmap, what things should we do, because there's so many potential things that you can do with artificial intelligence at the moment. And it's a matter of just going, right, we have finite resources. What things will probably deliver the best value to our clients early? So at the moment, we're using tools like ChatGPT to have a better onboarding process. So we've built a prototype chatbot that has access to our help documentation, our support documentation. So when users have problems, they can go and ask that, and it can go and answer. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that. And I use that tool quite successfully to build our AI roadmap. We're also looking at partnering with construction companies. So saying, hey, you know, we have a product that helps you plan projects, but it's your planning data. We'd like to work with you and get some of that planning data and actually start building these AI features. And it's a matter of we want to partner with them because one, we need their data, but two, these are the guys that are actually on the ground doing these projects, and they know often what they should be looking at, but they just don't have time to look at it. So we're trying to partner with people and work with them to understand what checks do they do, what things do they miss, and how can we help automate that for them.
So this is actually, it's an interesting opportunity for construction companies in that realm of partnering, because they're not just the customer in a certain way. They actually have that vital information that you, as a software developing company and a data company, that you need. So that leads me to one of my final questions here is how should I, as the CEO of a, let's say a commercial construction company that turns over $100 million plus a year, how should I begin to approach this journey into using AI? Obviously, partnering with companies is one way. Can you suggest some other ways that would be beneficial? Hey, this is Eric, and just a quick note: you have an executive in your company who is talented from a technical perspective, but they struggle with their people skills. You don't want to fire them, obviously. They're a deeply important member of your team, but they need to up level their game. That's why you should hire an executive coach. Now, not just any executive coach, but someone who actually knows construction, who's worked with contractors for over 2 decades, and who understands the challenges of shifting from being a project focused person to a people focused person. And that is the biggest challenge that a lot of these technically skilled executives have. And that's why you should contact me on my website, constructiongenius.com/contact. Put your details in there and we can connect and have a short call to discuss how I can help you with the executive coaching that I provide my clients. The whole idea of this executive coaching is not to be like some sort of self-help guru or a psychologist or something like that. That's not what it is. It's being a sounding board, someone who your executive can talk to and get feedback on how to deal with the tough conversations and the tough challenges they face on a daily basis. So reach out to me on my website if you have someone in mind who you think would benefit from working with me in an executive coaching capacity. All right, let's get back to my interview.
So I think one way that the construction industry in general needs to look at is this idea of working groups and consortiums, right? So I had a meeting the other day with a consultancy firm in Australia, and they'd been doing lots of work for the oil and gas industry. And we were talking through various things that I gave you examples of where they knew like they had to go and do geotechnical surveys. Like that would be basically a thing that they would check. And what they'd done is they had formed a working group with, your BP, Shell, Chevron, like all of these massive conglomerates had formed a working group, and they'd shared project data and a very high level of detail about project data. And then from that, they had hundreds, thousands of examples of previous projects and the ways in which they were planned, where they were located, where they were working, what were the specifics or nuances of that project. And then they had a very robust data set to actually go and make statistical judgments of saying, hey, historically, there is some variance between different companies because there's different management strategies, things like that. But actually, we can tell for sure between all of you, if you're doing this thing wrong, you're behind the eight ball. So by having that working group and sharing data, they're actually able to better improve their practices. And that's a big thing that I think the construction industry needs to look at. So going around and doing talks with many of them in Australia, they kind of look and go, yeah, data is the new oil and we own the data and we kind of don't want to share this. And it's like, okay, yeah, if data's the new oil, are you Shell or BP? No. What are you going to do with it, right? So I think one of the things there is this just getting them open to the idea of like, we need to partner with people. We need to understand that this is going to be an evolutionary change where we're going to need to understand that this is going to be a process where we need to look at going, it's moving us to where we need to validate what it's telling rather than just automating a thing, but also understanding, we probably don't have enough data on our own to answer all the questions we may have. We might have to share and work with our competitors in some sense. It's not going to help them any more than it's going to help us. And it's a way of going, okay, we need to start just considering doing this. What data could we share? What would not really be giving them our secret source? What in sharing could we actually help us learn where our real gaps are in our knowledge and the mistakes that we're making? That's one of probably the biggest one I would say. Is just being open to the idea of, you don't have to show them everything. You don't have to share like, hey, here's our internal process. Here's like how we win all these jobs. Like that's ridiculous. But by being open to going, okay, what are the key areas where we want to try to establish some standards and we want to try to share information. So, the idea of a lot of companies in Australia and the UK moving to BIM, I think America's starting to get there in terms of integrating BIM information, going, right, let's make sure that we're always standardizing on how we're doing these things so these AI tools can actually use that data.
Yeah. It's very interesting, that analogy of oil, because just like you have to extract the oil, you have to refine it, and then you have to convert it to use. So you have to do the same thing with data.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Great. So tell us a little more, Daniel, about how people can get in touch with you.
So to get in touch with us, best way is probably just reaching out through email. So daniel.hewson@elecosoft.com. Another good way would be to reach out to our team in America. So David Hernandez heads that up. I don't have his email, but probably through email or from calling the American branch, which I don't have their number at the moment.
No, that's fine. We'll have links in the show notes to the website. And Daniel, who would you like to get an email from in terms of the work that you're doing from the construction industry?
So for me, it would be an email from like ideally that CEO that we'll hypothesizing about before, or the head of planning, right? To say, hey, look, so on the podcast, we have a lot of data. We want to try to improve the way we're doing things. Can we work together, right? That for me would be a dream. Like we're actively looking for companies to work together. We're not going to solve this in 5 seconds. But we want to work with you, try to build this out. It's going to it's going to improve our product's value, but it is going to improve the efficiency in which you do things. So I think that would be fantastic. Being able to partner with some larger companies, particularly in America, to say, hey, here's how we've run projects previously. Here's our planning data. What can you tell us, right? Like, what can you tell us about what we did before and how is this going to help us going forward? So that would be fantastic.
That's tremendous. Well, I really, really appreciate you joining us on the show today, Daniel. Thank you for taking the time. And I appreciate the clear explanation of some of these AI matters that people may be a little cloudy on. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me, Eric.
Thank you for listening to Construction Genius and my interview with Daniel. Reach out to him on his email, daniel.hewson@elecosoft.com. Links in the show notes. And feel free to go to elecosoft.com and learn more about their business. Hope you found this interview useful. I know I found it very interesting. Feel free to share it with other people. And thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. I'll catch you on the next episode.